understand the economy, you have to understand human nature.
This podcast is powered by Acast.
Allez!
Bonjour tout le monde. Le podcast aujourd'hui vient de Aigues-Mortes, John.
Ah ouais?
C'est une ville ancienne dans le sud de France, dans la région qui s'appelle Camargue. Et cette ville est connue parce qu'elle est la ville depuis laquelle les croisades sont parties pour Jérusalem. Do you know that, John?
Yes, I did know that. It just trips off the tongue, Mac. It just,
I'm telling you.
I could be listening to Macron there.
Comme beurre, like butter. I have been, John, as you know, for the last 5 days in an isolation ward learning French.
Yes, indeed.
In a monastic settlement to the north of here. Actually, you'd love it because it's right beside a place I know is close to your heart, Châteauneuf-du-Pape.
Oh, indeed.
Right at the Côte du Rhône. But maintenant, je suis allé, hier, je suis allé à Aigues-Mortes. This town, it's an amazing, amazing place. It is, just to traduire, it is the place where the Crusaders, the first Crusaders left here in 1248, bound for Cyprus and then on to Jerusalem. And they were, you love this again, the Knights Templar, John. Remember the Knights Templars, right? Which are basically full part, all the history of this part of the region, this part of the world is full of the history of the Crusades, the Knights Templars. And of course, the Knights Templars were the people who were charged, the Christian knights who were charged with protecting the tomb of Christ in Jerusalem.
Yeah.
And
they were the police force, the security.
They were the cops, they were the CRS of their time. They were walking around with Crusader version of pepper spray.
Yeah. And things in their ears.
And
We've got a 394.
Exactly. But it's fair, as midlife crises go, doing an intensive French course is probably not the most adventurous, but maybe I think it's within the bounds of reasonably good behavior, I think.
Yeah, well, I thought you were going off the rails when you got the Vespa, but now this has gone full blown crisis.
Full blown crisis. But I have to tell you, I'm such an idiot. So I arrived last week, Marseille Airport, and I get a cab into Marseille, what's called Gare Saint-Charles, the big train station, in order to get a train to Avignon. But there's a bomb scare. So the car is closed. So the whole station is closed. When I say a bomb scare, somebody left a bag, and the French are particularly, they've got the Olympics coming up.
That was Shan, was it?
It was Shan, exactly. And
her Louis Vuitton bag.
Her Louis Vuitton bag. Her Dior bag. But the fascinating thing is you forget they've got the Olympics coming up, right? In about 2 months' time. And they are on high alert all the time. There's cops everywhere, right? So basically the Gare is closed down. The station's closed down. I say, okay, fine. I go for a beer across the road.
Of course.
And I wait. Of course, I don't realize that the timetable, of course, then is completely changed because all the trains are delayed. So I have a train, a TGV train, from Marseille to Avignon, from Avignon to Lyon, from Lyon to Paris. So that's fine. And I'm going to get off at Avignon, which is about 100 kilometers north.
Yeah. So
I get on the train and I'm happy enough. I put in my headphones, I'm listening to music. And I'm aware that the guy is talking in the background, the conducteur. Then I'm like,
of course, you hadn't done the French course at this stage.
I hadn't done the French course. I hadn't done the French course. I had no rashness what he's talking about. Okay. So I take out the headphones as the train is beginning to take off. And I'm quite excited about being on these TGVs. They go 300 miles an hour. And all I hear is sans arrêter, which means without stopping. And I thought, I'm on Paris train. So I end up in Paris last Saturday night.
How long did that take from Marseille to Paris?
About 3.5 hours, because the thing whores along at 300 miles an hour.
That's brilliant.
It's about 3.5 hours. But so I'm meant to be in my monastery outside Avignon, and I'm ending up at the Gare de Lyon in Paris. So I say, okay. So I get a hotel, very, very down market, probably right up our street, actually.
Yeah.
I get back on the TGV the next day to go back down to Marseille, the region where I'm learning French. And TGV is whirring along, and then it suddenly stops. And I'm thinking, what's going on here? How am I on the wrong TGV again? And at this stage now, I've spent 7 or 8 hours on TGVs, right? So I ask around, and le TGV a cassé contre une biche. It hit a deer at 300 miles an hour. Poor deer. But the problem is then, the TGV has got a deer stuck in the front grid of the TGV, so it can't move. So therefore, our TGV has to stop and pull in and let all the other ones coming behind us go in. So I spent 9 hours on the alleged fast train.
You really don't have good record in travelling.
I know, it's terrible. I can't be let out.
The man of the world, and he can't navigate Europe or America or Canada.
Shan's dad, Billy, used to refer to me as a man, because he's from Belfast, he says, that wee man there, he should get his shoelaces taken away from him. Right?
His what?
His shoelaces. They have an expression in Belfast that if you're completely handless, as I am, right, you're a danger to yourself with your own shoelaces. And he'd look at me and say, oh, wee McWilliams there now. Take shoelaces away from that man there.
He wasn't wrong.
He wasn't wrong. So I arrived traumatized pour ma cour français, and I have been here ever since. I have been here.
So the monks
ever
looked
since.
after you. I have to say, Mac, you too. I'm looking down the screen at Mac here, and he's looking incredibly fresh. He looks 10 years younger. Although he does have that monk's bald patch on his head now. They've shaved that in.
Exactly. It's all the fromage. And just, no, it was a very intensive course. It was like 8 hours a day.
Wow.
5 days, yeah. It's a bit,
that sounds like school as opposed to...
John, you're going to France this summer. You are the guy who should be on the course.
Yeah.
No, you're not having it, are you?
I'm not having it. I'm still doing my Babel, and I'll just immerse myself in the village.
Yeah, and you'll be fine. But the interesting thing what I discovered this week is how we learn. So I had no idea that the teachers of this course, who were very, very professional, they suggested to me that I am a kinesthetic learner. Right? And I had no idea what this is. So I always thought that I was quite a bookish person, that I'd learn from books and I read a lot and that's the way I absorb. But they said, like, after about 2 or 3 days of this course, they said, no, you are a kinesthetic learner. You need to be shown, you need to get up and move around, you need to actually role play, you need to do drama. It's really interesting. I had no idea, because when you're trying to learn, like, say, irregular verbs and that sort of stuff, which is really boring, the way in which it lodges in your head, some people learn from reading, some people learn from audio exclusively, a very small minority. Many people learn from visual cues, and visual cues are related to this kinesthetic learning, which is you learn from moving around, from being shown things. And it is fascinating. So I discovered...
Role-playing and stuff.
Yeah, role-playing. And I discovered that about myself.
Do you dress up as well?
I was cosplaying, John, for the whole thing. You've no idea. My inner Jeanne d'Arc came out, But that's another story that we'll not tell on this podcast.
But that's interesting, though, because I think I'd be more in the visual learning side of things. And it's interesting because while I work in audio, I don't learn best from audio. But when I'm doing audio design, like in the animations that we've done in the past, the audio design is all about creating an oral image in my head. So it is like visualizing.
But you're brilliant at that. You're brilliant at that. Just by the way, John and I have worked for, as you guys obviously know, podcast, but we worked for a long time on other stuff. And we used to do a lot of these cartoons, you might remember, called Punk Economics. And I used to give the audio to John and the visuals done by a great cartoonist by Mark Flood. And you are amazing at creating the audio background and
why? Thank you, David.
And bringing it, it brings it to life, actually. It really brings it to life, So I'm just saying, if you decide to go and do a French course, you may well find that you are one of these kinesthetic learners, and that you might find that it's much easier to do it that way.
But don't go on a TGV.
Without going on TGV and without hitting a deer. A biche à moyenne vitesse. That's a deer at slow pace rather than a train at haute vitesse, a train at high pace, right? But so it's been interesting. But I'll be home now tomorrow, the next day. But I'm going to go around now and get in touch with my inner Knight's Temper in this place, Aigues-Mortes, and go and walk the walls. And also, this town is probably one of the most original victims of climate change, John, because it used to be on the Rhone Delta, where the Rhone came down to the sea and split, a bit like the Nile Delta, into lots of tributaries. And of course, those tributaries have silted up. So the reason the Crusaders came here used to be on the sea. And of course, as the Rhone deposited loads and loads and loads of nutrients around, the river silted up. So the industry here for years has been salt, because it's so hot,
Yeah.
They're salt flats, right? And you forget that's why the place remained really rich, because salt was incredibly expensive. It was probably the most expensive commodity. That's why, the expression soldiers comes from. They were people who were paid in salt, in soldats.
Okay.
You're right, because the army were paid in salt. That's where the expression.
Oh, really? They're paid in salt?
Yeah, he's worth his salt. And of course, what happened here was they used to export salt down to Africa. Remember that place, Timbuktu?
Yeah.
And the Africans exported gold to them for salt, because the Africans needed salt. And the
What's the
Europeans
exchange
wanted
rate
gold.
on that, I wonder?
I'm not too sure, John. I'm not too sure. It's like the dollar-euro exchange rate. It's fluctuating all the way. But isn't that amazing? Like what it was, like, one whatever block of salt for one block of gold. And of course, the Africans used gold for ornamentation. They never used gold for currency. The Europeans used gold for currency. So suddenly gold became not just valuable for its intrinsic worth, but for its currency worth. This is all the story of money. In actual fact, as you know, John, I've been working on this book about money. It's been published on the 11th of September. And there's loads of these little details. I'm
looking forward to that, Mac, I have to say.
Yeah, no, I just got the covers back yesterday, and the covers look fantastic, and it's wonderful. But I'm looking here. I'm going to go spend the afternoon pottering around. But, John, what I discovered in France, and this podcast is going to be about France, this extraordinary country in the center of Europe. And when I say the center, not geographically the center, but I think the intellectual, emotional, political center of Europe, and where it's going. Because this week, I don't know if you were watching, in France and Germany, there was a massive, massive hullabaloo about Macron going to Germany. And about, if you think of the European Union now, think about all the threats to the European Union. There's the populist threat from Le Pen, from Meloni, for the Alternative for Deutschland, all that sort of stuff. That's all going on. You have the threat from Russia, which is real and very, very urgent now. You have the defense threat, because Europe's NATO arm has never really been spending as much as they should have spent.
Well, yeah, I keep hearing this about the air defense in particular of Europe being underfunded and underinvested and,
Yeah, all that sort of stuff. You've got mass immigration. You have Gaza splitting the difference between the people who are very pro-Gaza and still the European Union, which is very pro-Israel, the official European Union.
Yeah.
So you have all this stuff going on. And Macron goes to Germany last week. And when I was here, it was all over the newspapers and all over the TV. And I want to talk about two things, Jonas. One is the centrality of what they call the Franco-Allemand Amitié, the French-German Friendship Treaty, which was signed in 1963. Most non-German and French people know nothing about this, or very little about this. It actually is the foundational document, I would suggest, for the European Union.
What was it based on?
So basically, the history between France and Germany since 1870 is an incredibly violent one. So 1870, the Franco-Prussian War, where the Germans occupy Paris. You've got the Paris Commune comes after that. And in effect, this is when Germany emerges as a serious European political power based around Prussia, a country which no longer exists, which is the most amazing thing, Remember we talked about that before.
Where are the Prussians gone?
Where are the Prussians gone? Well, they were erased off the map. The Americans said, these people are so problematic, we're actually never going to refer to that country again. And it's gone. It was a country for hundreds of years, and it is actually gone. So 1870 to 1945. Think about this. You have three wars between the Germans and the French. The 1870 Franco-Prussian War, the First World War, of course, and of course the Second World War, right? So by 1945, the relationship between these two countries has been characterized by bloodshed, by violence, by occupation, by Vichy France, by the German occupation of France, the German destruction of the French army in 1941, all that sort of stuff. And out of the ashes of that emerges a couple of politicians, Adenauer on the West German side, Konrad Adenauer, and de Gaulle, of course, on the French side, and a few of these European federalists, the main one of which was a guy called Robert Schuman. And Robert Schuman is now, if you ever go to Brussels, the sort of godfather of the European Union. He's regarded as the capo di tutti capi of thinkers of the European Union. And Schuman went so far, John, amazingly, in an effort to try and solidify peace between Germany and France, suggests that there should be a federation of France and Germany together because they were so incapable of not fighting. So you have three phases in this relationship. You have 1870 to 1945, violence, war, competition, etc. Then 1945 to 1963, you have kind of reconciliation. You have the beginning of the European Union, what was a thing called the Treaty of Rome, which was 1957, which was called the European Coal and Steel Treaty. And the reason it was called coal and steel was because these were the two industries that France and Germany fought over in Alsace, in Lorraine, and in Saarland over, a century, orders coming and going and coming and going.
Yeah.
And this is the embryonic development of the European Union. But as a separate treaty, in 1963, France and Germany signed this friendship treaty. And this friendship treaty is exactly what Macron was talking about the other day, right? And it's basically a cultural, an economic, a political, a social, and a geopolitical understanding between Paris and originally Bonn, and now Paris and Berlin, that they will mutually support each other all the time.
Yeah.
And this, I would say, is a parallel power structure to the EU. We talk about the EU as if, for example, the relationship between all the EU members are equal, fair, just, and carry equal weight. They don't. The crucial relationship is France and Germany. And it has been fought over the issue of currency and economics time and time and time again. And this is the interesting thing, that the French and Germans have accelerated the integration of the EU using money, using currency, using exchange rates, and ultimately ending up at the euro.
Yeah.
And it goes back to this very strange thing, which is that France has always felt insecure in the context of economic relations with Germany, because West Germany was so dynamic and so wealthy and so industrial during the 50s, 60s, 70s, and 80s, well, all the way up till now. Yeah. And France was always seen as more a second-rate industrial player. I mean, so much so, I always think that the French were always pretending to be a little Germany economically, but in actual fact, they were a big Italy. And that's what they really get pissed off about, right?
Yeah,
being compared to the Italians. So the first thing was that when the 1970s emerges and inflation takes off in Europe, the only country that didn't experience high inflation was West Germany, because the Bundesbank was very, very, very hawkish on inflation, raising interest rates very, very quickly. And interestingly, John, this is where the Alternative for Deutschland, the party, gets its roots. Now, this is a fantastic story, right? There's a thing in German economics called Ordo economics, O-R-D-O, which is an orthodoxy in Germany, which is that the central bank has to remain absolutely 100% independent. It has to control the money, and it has to raise interest rates every time it sees inflation emerging. And that, and only that, is the central anchor of economic policy, and everything else is subservient to that, right? This is what the Germans did during the Bundesbank years. The French thought, okay, well, you know what we're going to do? We're going to link our franc to the West German mark, and in so doing, we're going to push the economies together, and we're going to be seen as a sort of a proto-German currency. That all works in the late 70s until the early 80s. The French then have a massive presidential election in the sense that it causes a shift in French power. And Mitterrand, you remember Francois Mitterrand?
I do, indeed.
Mitterrand comes in and he's a socialist.
Yeah.
And Mitterrand says, okay, don't worry, I'm going to nationalize industries. So he did the opposite to Mrs. Thatcher. Mrs. Thatcher gets in around the same time in England and starts to privatize everything, starts to change the UK and has this class war and goes after the coal miners and all that sort of stuff. Mitterrand comes in and does something completely different. He says, hold on a second, what we're going to do now is we're going to nationalize everything. We're going to be socialist. And of course, the financial market said, well, if you're going to be socialist, what you're going to do is you're going to expand the budget deficit and the debt to GDP ratio. And therefore, the currency has to fall in order to accommodate this. And of course, the French said no. And there was a speculative attack against the French franc. And the policy, after about 4 or 5 weeks, was abandoned. There was a massive U-turn.
Yeah.
And the U-turn was called the franc fort, and it was everything is going to be subservient now to the strong franc, and the strong franc is going to be subservient to the Bundesbank, and the Bundesbank is subservient to nobody bar themselves. So in effect, John, from 1980 onwards, the French abandoned all domestic economic policy and gave it to Germany, which was a massive humiliation, massive humiliation.
Okay.
And this was festering in France for a long, long time. And then, as I think we've spoken before, the French bureaucrats at the Quai d'Orsay, which is where the finance ministry is in Paris, they got their opportunity to seek revenge on the Germans when German unification happened. And I think we've we've talked about this before, haven't we?
Yeah.
Whereas basically German unification happens overnight. The wall falls. Nobody expects this to happen. People saying, what the hell's going to happen? And of course, all the old occupying powers of Germany. So after the Second World War, there was Russia, Britain, America, and France, that occupied Germany. After they came together and said, what are we going to do? Our entire post-war strategy was based on East Germany remaining the Russian piece in the European jigsaw. And now it's gone. And so the Russians were, Gorbachev was like, I've got a lot to deal with myself. I'm dealing with all sorts. You guys figure it out. The Americans, of course, were very, very pro-unification because they saw that as an opportunity to push American interests into Central and Eastern Europe.
Yeah.
But the Brits, Mrs. Thatcher was very against unification because she thought that unification, the Germans would go back to their usual, after a while, start rearming, start getting nasty, all that sort of stuff, right? She didn't trust the Germans. And of course, the deciding vote came for the French. What were the French going to do? Traditionally, the French have been very anti-German expansion, been afraid of Germany, all that sort of stuff. But the crafty French came up with a great plan. They said, look, we've always thought your currency is stronger than ours. And we've always been a little bit humiliated by that. And we've always felt a little bit regarded as a second-rate citizen, even though we feel that we're a big imperial power, right? So we wouldn't mind your currency. That would be nice, wouldn't it? You want to get permission from us to reunify because you really want to reunify. It's your national project. So why don't we do the following? You can reunify your country if you give us your money. And that is the deal at the core of the euro. And lo and behold, a pipe dream of French federalists called the euro became a reality. By 1992, there was a big European internal market move, and the euro was meant to go hand in hand with that.
Do you think that was a strong enough reason for the basis of the euro?
No, of course not. That's why the euro has been bizarrely disruptive all over the place, because you push all these countries together that don't have the same economic cycle.
Yeah.
So, for example, the idea that Greece should have been in a currency union with Germany is bizarre. The idea that Portugal should have been in a currency union with France is bizarre. The idea that Ireland should be in a currency union with Germany when we don't even have the same economic cycle. We've got an Anglo-American cycle. Is bizarre. And I think that one of the reasons why Ireland has had a lot of instability, macroeconomic instability, since the early 2020s, or early 2000s, sorry, John, is because we have an inappropriate currency. But we have the currency and that's it.
So on that basis alone, is there a possibility that the euro could fall apart? Because it's under increasing pressure. And actually, just as you're saying that, I was reading in the FT the other day that France has been downgraded by S&P Global. So what does that mean in the grand scheme of things? They are really, really humiliated by that. Okay, and I'll talk about that in a sec. It's just that the euro, in a sense, creates, I would much prefer had we adopted the Danish position and the Swedish position, which they both said, thanks, but no thanks. We want to be in the European Union, that's fine, but we're keeping our currency. And the reason the currency is important is because it actually allows you to affect economic change. So I think one of the reasons we get these boom-bust cycles in Ireland is we're in the euro. Yeah. That there's no way of controlling flows into the economy. There's no way of raising interest rates. So, for example, Irish interest rates now should be much higher than they are because the economy is booming. And the economy, there's too much demand in the economy. There's not enough supply. We see that the tent cities in Dublin are a reflection of the fact that we too many people coming in and we can't build quickly enough. So our supply is constrained. So in that context, you should be able to repress your demand. And you usually do that from a higher exchange rate and higher rate of interest. We don't do that. So what we do is we actually push a huge amount of demand into the economy without the supply being able to adjust, and we get overheating. So we get traffic, so we get house price booms, all these sort of things. That's absolutely fundamentally related to the euro. Fundamentally, right? Official Ireland won't say that because we're entirely committed to the euro because it's part of our biggest European project.
But had we had the self-confidence of the Danes to say, look, we're really good Europeans, but you know what? We'll keep our currency. I think we'd probably be in a much more manageable macroeconomic territory, in a much more macroeconomic world.
Yeah, I mean, just based on what you're saying there, like, I kind of begin to worry about the euro, and then you also begin to question, like, what is next for the euro? I mean, it is going to come under increasing pressure. But before you answer that, let's do a bit of this. You know, of course, Mac, we've spoken about this before. The French-German relationship, you know, dates back to 800 with Charlemagne. I mean, he was the first man to bring the two together.
He was the original Eurocrat.
Yeah,
he was
absolutely.
the original Eurocrat. And I'm in a part of the world where they didn't like him at all, around Provence and all these places, you know. This is very Occidental, you know.
Yeah.
Languedoc, you know. So these guys were very much again.
Yeah, and the other lads that were against him as well were Saxony. Germany.
The home of Martin Luther.
Yeah.
The home of Martin Luther.
But let's get back to the euro.
Okay.
It came about in a kind of a weird way, almost kind of accidentally. It was the French grabbing an opportunity. So, like, is it strong enough to survive?
Well, I'll give you an image. The midwife of the euro was French neurosis about its own political power, okay?
Yeah.
And then it is birthed through the birth canal of the German unification, and then it arrives as this reasonably half-formed child that has grown up.
Beautiful imagery, Mac. Beautiful.
Has grown up, you know, quite an interesting little kid, a monetary child, okay?
Yeah.
But that's not to say that the child is without its faults. Okay,
yeah. It's now grown into a teenager. Right?
It's now a teenager, and it's a little bit. Well, it's a little bit stroppy. You know, its clothes don't fit particularly well. Yeah. You know, it's slamming the doors, it's shouting and roaring. It's like lots of zits. It's got a little bit of acne, and it's shouting and roaring. And you know, it's online, and it's down all sorts of weird rabbit holes, right?
Yeah.
So imagine the currency is a child, right? Is a creature, and so where is it now? Like, first of all, the moment of peak destruction for the euro was the European bond crisis after the European banking crisis, after the European debt crisis, triggered largely by the Greek defaults. Greece defaulted a number of times within the euro. There was a perception that couldn't be done. In fact, the Greeks did it. And you know what? Nothing really happened.
Yeah.
So at the core of the euro is this idea that European political integration will be led by money and finance. That's the key factor. And the European Central Bank in Frankfurt is basically the big parent of the euro in the sense that it sets interest rates, all sorts of stuff. Now, I think that moment has passed in terms of the fragility of the euro.
Yeah.
And the reason is the following. COVID bailed out the euro. This is a strange thing.
Right.
So basically, the major fault line in the euro has always been, this comes back to your S&P downgrade of France.
Yeah.
That the Italian bond market, there's basically too much debt in Italy, the economy doesn't go strongly enough, and periodically they may not necessarily be able to meet all their debt repayments, right? So that's the really big issue. And the article of faith of the Bundesbank has always been that central banks cannot and should never buy government debt and finance government debt, right? That has been an article of faith.
Okay.
This is where the Alternative for Deutschland emerges, John. The Alternative for Deutschland, which is now a 25% right-wing party in Germany, started bizarrely as a project by obscure economists to try and highlight the fact that Germany had abandoned its monetary orthodoxy. When did they abandon that? They abandoned that when they started to buy certain amounts of, or at least support the Greek debt market after the Greeks default.
Okay.
But much more importantly is COVID, John, in the whole thing. So COVID arrives and everyone's locked down. And the economies are completely and utterly without any growth and completely and utterly without any means of growing. Okay. And if you have no means of growing and you have a very, very high debt ratio, it means you will default because in effect, you can't generate the tax revenue because there's no growth to pay the existing and outstanding debt repayments. So under the auspices of Mario Draghi and Mario Draghi's successor, Christine Lagarde, basically the Italians and French have orchestrated a coup d'etat at the top of the ECB. And what they've done is they've elbowed out all the Germans and they've put their own people in there. And what they've done is they have torn up the sacred rule book of the Bundesbank by, during COVID, the central bank just bought all Italian debt. Okay, just bought it.
Yeah.
And that's completely against all the rules of the old German way.
Yeah, but it was such an unusual, unique time as well.
Precisely. So COVID bailed out the Italian bond market.
Right.
Nobody's talking about this, right? And the legacy of COVID is that there is a perception that if the Italians hit the buffers again, the central bank will just buy the debt. So there is, in effect, what they would call an option. The Bundesbank has given the markets an option to say, don't worry, we'll buy it all back at a certain price. Now that, of course, really rankled the Germans. And that gave the alternative for Deutschland its intellectual, it's amazing to think, its intellectual heft.
Yeah.
Because they said, we are doing nothing. We're not a right-wing party. All we are is the keepers of the flame of the Bundesbank, which after all was the central institution of the West German Federal Republic of Germany. So it's all intermeshed. This is the amazing thing now. And now, John, to conclude, as we go forward into the European election, who's going to do best in Germany? The Alternative for Deutschland, which came out of an obscure academic economic movement to try and strong-arm the ECB, using the European Court of Justice, amazingly, to mimic the Bundesbank. The French and Italians said, sorry, lads, we're in control now. Off you go. Under the canopy of COVID, they started buying Italian debt. Now the market believes that the Germans will, in effect, pay for Italian debt via the Bundesbank. And as a result, the euro is now stronger, John, rather than weaker. That's the key.
Wow.
That's the key, because currencies are made strong by flexibility. Currencies are made strong by discretion over rules. They are made strong by being able to adapt and adjust to things. And now, ironically, despite the euro being kind of unsuited academically and intellectually and from an economic policy perspective to keeping the European Union together, had the Germans had their way, I think the euro will be set for another crisis. But now that the French and Italians are running the show and they're running it pragmatically, I think the euro will adjust. So to answer your question, John, we have gone from the Crusades. We have gone from the Crusades to the money in your back pocket in a few leaps and a few jumps and a few hop skips.
TGVs.
TGVs and poor Aldirs getting smashed, all that stuff. To answer your question, I think the euro is stronger now than it ever has been. But it's only strong because of the strength of weak ties. Remember, I talked to you about this thing before.
Yeah.
The strength of weak ties. When the ties are weak, the network is stronger. And the currency union is nothing more than a network of countervailing, sometimes counterbalancing, sometimes counterintuitive interests. And as a result of French and Italian pragmatism, the euro is much stronger. We'll talk to you Thursday.